Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Outlook for September through December 2015. This is Gina McGuire. First, we will look at the recent weather throughout the month of August, and then the outlook as we move through September through December for weather and fire potential. Looking at the last 30 days, temperatures have been near to just below normal over the eastern and northern portion of the Great Basin, as showers have been more concentrated across Utah and Wyoming. However, near to just above normal temperatures have continued over the western half of the Great Basin. Storms have also moved through the Great Basin periodically, bringing some shower activity, with some areas of Nevada, southeastern Idaho into Utah and Wyoming to near to above normal precipitation. However, still very dry conditions persisted over far northwest Nevada into southwest and west central Idaho mountains for below normal precipitation. If we look back to the beginning of the water year, which is October 1st, 2014, the precipitation we've seen in the spring and throughout the summer has now pushed areas of the eastern half of Utah into southeast Idaho and Wyoming and over parts of western Nevada to above normal. This is a significant improvement to what we saw in precipitation during the winter months with very dry conditions. However, still some areas of southern, central, and eastern Nevada and up into Idaho are still seeing below normal precipitation from the beginning of the water year. What this has done to our drought conditions, it's still kept generally extreme to exceptional drought over the western half of Nevada, with now extreme drought conditions developing over the last several months over parts of southwest and central Idaho. Over the eastern half of the Great Basin, with the moisture that we've been seeing over the last several months, it has kept the drought a little bit less extreme. However, we still are seeing moderate to severe drought in many locations. The drought outlook through the end of November shows very little change to the drought over the western half of the Great Basin and up into Idaho, with some improvement or removal of drought conditions over parts of Utah. Now looking at our current fuel conditions across the Great Basin, we still do have grass growth, which is above normal in parts of the Great Basin from the late spring and summer rains, especially across parts of the northern two-thirds of Nevada, Utah, and parts of Idaho, with still carryover from 2014. ERCs have been increasing over the last couple of weeks with drier weather, especially over western and northern areas of the Great Basin, and are near or above normal in those locations. Over the eastern half of the Great Basin, as moisture has been a little bit more consistent, ERCs are near or below normal over parts of Utah into southern Nevada. The higher elevations are still extremely dry after another poor year for snowpack, however have responded to the recent moisture that we have seen in some areas over the last several months, with the higher elevations still green in areas of Utah and Wyoming that have seen these longer periods of moisture throughout the summer. Sagebrush fuel moisture has been trending downward despite the recent moisture and is below normal in most areas of the Great Basin, most below normal over parts of Idaho into western Nevada that have been on the drier side. Looking at some of the graphics, these are ERCs currently across the Great Basin, and looking up into Idaho, Wyoming, and northern Nevada, you can see these ERCs are near or above normal. Looking further south, you can see over Utah and southern Nevada, ERCs are below normal just due to the moisture we've seen recently, and are still near or just above normal over parts of western Nevada and the Sierra Front. If we look at live fuel moisture, you'll see that Thousand Hour and Sagebrush fuel moisture are still below normal in many areas, and in some areas are even hitting historic lows, at least over the last couple of years, over parts of southern Idaho. If we look further south over parts of Nevada and Utah, again we're seeing similar conditions with 100-hour fuel moisture and sagebrush fuel moisture well below normal due to the dry weather, especially across Nevada, but even in western Utah, which has seen some moisture recently, the western side of the state has not been as wet as points further east, therefore live fuel moisture is still below normal. Now that we've looked at the recent and current conditions across the Great Basin, looking at the next several weeks, the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center takes us through the middle of September, where we're still looking at above normal temperatures, especially across the western two-thirds of the Great Basin, and below normal precipitation, with fairly dry conditions. However, if we look towards the October through December time period, we may start to see a little bit more moisture moving into southern and eastern areas with still below normal precipitation and warm temperatures over Idaho and into northern and western Nevada, especially through October or even early November. As we move later in the outlook, moving towards Thanksgiving and into December, we may see more of those cooler, wet systems start to move into the west coast, which may change things towards the end of the outlook. Also, another factor that's been occurring this year is the hurricane season outlook. We've seen a very active hurricane season over the eastern and central Pacific, and this is largely due to the fact that we're in a state of El Nino with the warmer sea surface temperatures, the warmer waters, and lower wind shear is more favorable environment for stronger and more numerous tropical storms and hurricanes over the eastern and central Pacific, which is what we've been seeing. Therefore, we'll likely continue to see this above normal season through the end of the hurricane season this year. Over the Atlantic, where water temperatures have been a little bit cooler, we're seeing less activity than we would normally see. Now, if we put everything that we've already talked about together, the recent weather trends, the fuel moisture, and the fuel loading, we come out with our overall expected fire danger over the next several months. We are expecting normal conditions across the Great Basin as we move through September and through December. Fire activity typically starts to decrease in September across the Great Basin, and we will likely see that as we move later in the month into October. However, during very windy and dry periods, we still may see an uptick in fire activity briefly if we see starts in certain locations, especially in areas that have a higher grass crop. As we move through October, November, and December, and we see longer nights and cooler temperatures, and also better chances of precipitation as we move through November and December, we'll likely see very little fire activity, which would be considered normal for the Great Basin. If we look on a national level, you'll see the above normal fire potential in the Northwest and California decreasing as we move through October and November. However, still we'll likely see some above normal fire potential over parts of California just due to the windy and dry periods as we move through the fall. For the Great Basin, again, normal fire potential is expected. However, brief periods of increased fire activity is still possible, especially in September or even early October after very warm and dry periods and during our stronger wind events, especially across Nevada and Idaho, where the fuels have been drier and in areas of higher grass fuel loading. That concludes our monthly and seasonal outlook. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.